Robert Hayes buried his daughter on a cold March morning 3 years ago. The cemetery was crowded with people from their small town in Vermont, neighbors, teachers from the high school where Emily had been a junior, her friends crying in clusters, his ex-wife Linda barely holding herself together in the front row. The casket was closed. The fire had been too severe for an open viewing. That's what the funeral director had told them gently, and Robert had been grateful not to see what the accident had done to his little girl. Better to remember her as she'd been, 17 years old, bright smile, planning for college, her whole life ahead of her. The accident had happened on Route 7, just outside Middlebury. Emily had been driving home from her part-time job at the bookstore when a truck lost control on black ice, crossed the median, and hit her car head-on. The vehicle had caught fire immediately. By the time emergency services arrived, there was nothing they could do. The identification had been made through dental records and the personal effects found at the scene. Her phone, her wallet with her driver's license, the silver bracelet Robert had given her for her 16th birthday. The medical examiner had been certain. The remains matched Emily's height, age, and dental profile. Robert stood at the graveside, his arm around his younger daughter Megan, who was 14 and hadn't stopped crying for 3 days. Linda was on Megan's other side, the three of them united in grief, despite the divorce that had finalized 2 years earlier. The pastor spoke about God's plan, about Emily being in a better place, about finding comfort in faith. Robert heard none of it. His mind was stuck on the last conversation he'd had with Emily 3 days before the accident. They'd argued about her college plans. She wanted to take a gap year, travel, figure out what she really wanted to study. He'd insisted she apply to colleges immediately, not waste time, follow the traditional path. They'd both said things they didn't mean, and she'd left his house angry, going back to Linda's place where she primarily lived since the divorce. He'd planned to call her, to apologize, to tell her he supported whatever choice she made. But he'd waited, and then it was too late, and now he'd carry that final argument with him for the rest of his life. The funeral ended. People filed past offering condolences that Robert barely acknowledged. Back at Linda's house, neighbors had organized a reception. Food, coffee, hushed conversations. Robert sat in a corner, numb, watching Megan talk to Emily's friends, seeing how they all clung to each other. Over the following weeks, Robert tried to return to normal life. He was a civil engineer for the state, steady work that required focus and precision, but he couldn't focus. He'd find himself staring at blueprints, seeing nothing, his mind replaying the night the police had knocked on his door with the news. He started therapy at Linda's insistence. Dr. Patricia Morrison specialized in grief counseling, and she was patient with his anger, his guilt, his inability to accept what had happened. "It's normal to struggle with sudden loss, Doctor," Morrison told him during their 4th session, "especially when there are unresolved conflicts. But Robert, you can't change the past. You can only decide how to move forward." "I don't want to move forward," Robert said. "Moving forward means accepting she's gone, means letting go. I'm not ready to let go." Grief doesn't have a timeline, but there's a difference between honoring her memory and staying frozen in the moment of loss. Robert knew she was right intellectually, but emotionally he was stuck. He kept Emily's room exactly as she'd left it at his house. The books on her shelf, the clothes in her closet, the half-finished painting on her easel. Linda had done the same at her place. Neither of them could bear to pack away their daughter's life. Megan struggled too. She withdrew from friends. Her grades dropped. She stopped playing soccer, the sport she'd loved. Robert tried to be present for her, tried to be the stable parent, but he felt like he was drowning and dragging her down with him. 6 months after the funeral, Linda called with news that shattered the fragile stability they'd built. The driver of the truck, he's been charged. Vehicular manslaughter. The trial is scheduled for October. Robert felt rage surge through him. The man who'd killed his daughter would finally face justice, but it wouldn't bring Emily back. Nothing would bring her back. The trial was brutal. Sitting in the courtroom, hearing the medical examiner testify about the condition of the remains, listening to accident reconstruction experts describe the impact, seeing photographs of the burned-out car, it was like living through Emily's death again. The truck driver, a man named James Wheeler, was 43 and had been driving fatigued after a double shift. He'd fallen asleep at the wheel. He expressed remorse, cried on the stand, but Robert felt nothing but hatred. This man's mistake, his choice to drive tired, had killed Emily. Wheeler was convicted and sentenced to 8 years in prison. Robert felt no satisfaction, no closure. Emily was still gone. The conviction changed nothing. Life continued in that numb, grey way. Robert went to work, came home, checked on Megan, repeated the cycle. Linda dated someone briefly, but it didn't last. They were both too broken, too focused on the daughter they'd lost, and the one they were trying to keep from falling apart. 2 years after Emily's death, Megan graduated middle school. It should have been a celebration, but all Robert could think about was that Emily wasn't there to see it, wouldn't be there for Megan's high school graduation, or college, or wedding, or any of the milestones they'd never share. 3 years after the funeral, Robert had achieved what Dr. Morrison called functional grief. He could work, maintain his house, take care of Megan, go through the motions of living. But part of him had died with Emily, and he'd accepted that it would never return. It was a Tuesday evening in March, 3 years to the day after the funeral. Robert was making dinner, pasta, Megan's favorite, when his phone rang. Unknown number. He almost didn't answer, but something made him pick up. "Hello?" Silence on the other end. Then a voice, hesitant and quiet. "Dad?" Robert's heart stopped. The voice was older, rougher, but unmistakable. He'd heard it every day for 17 years. He knew it like his own heartbeat. "Emily," the word came out as a whisper. "Dad, it's me. I'm alive. I need help. Please, I need you to—" The call cut off. Robert stood frozen in his kitchen, phone pressed to his ear, the dial tone buzzing. His hands were shaking. His mind was screaming that this was impossible, that Emily was dead, that he'd buried her, that this had to be a cruel prank or a hallucination or— The phone rang again. Same unknown number. Robert answered immediately. "Emily? Emily, is that you?" "Dad, I don't have much time. I'm in Ohio, near Columbus. Her voice broke. "I need you to come get me. Please, I'll explain everything, but I need you now." "Where are you? Give me an address." She rattled off an address, a street name he didn't recognize. "Dad, I'm so scared. Please hurry." "I'm coming. Emily, I'm coming right now. Stay where you are. I'll be there as fast as I can." The call ended. Robert stood in his kitchen. His entire understanding of reality shattered. Emily was alive. His daughter, whom he'd buried 3 years ago, was alive and in Ohio and needed him. He grabbed his keys, his wallet, didn't even turn off the stove. Megan was at a friend's house. He'd call her from the road. Right now he had to get to Ohio, had to get to Emily. He was halfway to his car when rational thought reasserted itself. This could be a scam. Someone who'd researched his family, who knew about Emily's death, using it to lure him somewhere. It happened. He'd read about it. But that voice, he knew his daughter's voice. And even if there was a 1% chance this was real, he had to go. Robert got in his car and started driving toward Ohio, his phone in his hand, praying it would ring again, praying this wasn't madness, praying that somehow, impossibly, his daughter was alive. Columbus, Ohio was an 8-hour drive from Robert's home in Vermont. He made it in 6.5, pushing the speed limit on I-90, his mind racing faster than the car. He'd called Linda from the road. That conversation had been chaotic, her disbelief, her anger at what she thought was a cruel prank, then her desperate hope that maybe, impossibly, it was real. They'd agreed he should go, should check. Linda would stay with Megan, wouldn't tell her anything until they knew for certain. "Robert, if this is real," Linda's voice had broken. "If Emily's alive, where has she been for 3 years? Why didn't she contact us?" "I don't know, but I have to find out." The address Emily had given was in a rundown neighborhood on the east side of Columbus. Boarded-up houses, empty lots, the kind of area people avoided after dark. Robert arrived just after 1 a.m., exhausted from the drive and wired on adrenaline and coffee. The house matched the address, a small ranch-style home with peeling paint and an overgrown yard. One light was on in a front window. Robert sat in his car for a moment, gathering courage. What if this was a trap? What if someone was using Emily's name to rob him, hurt him, but he'd come this far? He had to know. Robert walked to the front door and knocked. No answer. He knocked again, louder. "Emily, it's Dad. I'm here." The door opened a crack, chain still engaged. A face appeared in the gap, older than he remembered, thinner, with shadows under the eyes. But it was her. It was Emily. "Dad," her voice cracked. "You came." "Oh my God! Emily! Emily, it's really you!" She unlatched the chain and opened the door fully. Robert swept her into his arms, and she collapsed against him, sobbing. He held his daughter, his dead daughter who was somehow alive, and cried harder than he'd cried at her funeral. They stood in the doorway for several minutes, just holding each other. Finally, Emily pulled back. "We need to go. We need to leave right now." "What? Why?" "I'll explain in the car. Please, Dad, we can't stay here." Robert saw the fear in her eyes and didn't argue. They got into his car and he pulled away from the house, heading back toward the highway. Emily sat in the passenger seat, staring straight ahead, her hands trembling. "Emily, what's happening? Where have you been? We buried you. The accident, the medical examiner. How are you alive?" "I wasn't in that accident," she said quietly. "Someone else was. They thought it was me because of my license, my phone. But it wasn't me." "Then where were you?" Emily was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was barely audible. "I was taken. The day before the accident. I was leaving work, and someone grabbed me, forced me into a van. I woke up in a basement somewhere. I don't even know where. And I've been held since then." Robert's hands tightened on the steering wheel. "Held? You mean—" "I was trafficked, Dad." The words came out flat, emotionless. "For 3 years, different places, different situations. I tried to escape so many times. Finally, 3 days ago, I got away. Took a man's phone while he wasn't paying attention. I've been hiding, trying to figure out what to do." Robert felt sick. His mind reeled, trying to process what she was telling him. His daughter hadn't died in an accident. She'd been kidnapped, held captive, subjected to horrors he couldn't begin to imagine. "We need to go to the police," he said. "Right now. We need to—" "No!" Emily's voice rose in panic. "Dad, no, not yet, please. I can't deal with police right now. I just need to go home. I need to feel safe, please." Robert wanted to argue. Someone had done this to his daughter. They needed to be caught, prosecuted, punished. But looking at Emily's face, seeing the terror there, he couldn't push. Okay, we'll go home first. But Emily, eventually we have to report this. People need to know you're alive. There are bad people who need to be stopped. I know, just not tonight, please." They drove in silence for a while. Robert's mind was spinning with questions, but he didn't know how to ask them. Finally he said, "Your mother, Megan, they need to know. Can I call them?" Emily nodded. Yeah, call Mum." Robert pulled over at a rest stop and called Linda. She answered on the first ring, her voice tight with anxiety. "Robert, Linda, it's real, it's her. Emily's alive, she's with me. We're driving back." He heard Linda make a sound, somewhere between a gasp and a sob. "Put her on. I need to hear her voice." Robert handed the phone to Emily. "Mum?" Emily's voice broke. "Mum, I'm so sorry, I'm so sorry." Linda was crying, saying Emily's name over and over. The conversation lasted 10 minutes, mostly just both of them crying. When Emily handed the phone back, Linda said to Robert, "Bring her home. Bring our baby home." They drove through the night. Emily dozed fitfully, jerking awake at every sound. Robert kept glancing at her, still not quite believing this was real. His daughter, alive. After 3 years of grief, of visiting her grave, of trying to accept she was gone, she was here, beside him, breathing, but also changed. The girl he'd buried had been 17, full of life and plans and teenage confidence. The young woman sitting beside him now was 20, but she looked older, hollow, damaged in ways he couldn't yet comprehend. As dawn broke, they crossed into Vermont. Emily woke and looked out the window at the familiar landscape. "I never thought I'd see home again," she whispered. "You're home now," Robert said. "You're safe. Whatever happened, whatever you went through, we'll deal with it together. You're not alone anymore." Emily nodded but said nothing. Robert wondered what horrors were playing through her mind, what memories she was carrying that he couldn't access or understand. They arrived at Robert's house at 7 a.m. Linda's car was already there. She'd driven over as soon as Robert had called, and sitting on the front steps, looking confused and worried, was Megan. Emily saw her younger sister and started crying. Megan saw Emily and froze, her face going white. "That's not possible," Megan said. "You're dead. I went to your funeral." "Meg, it's me," Emily said, getting out of the car slowly. "It's really me." Megan backed away, shaking her head. "This isn't real. This is some kind of trick." Linda emerged from the house and ran to Emily, pulling her into a fierce embrace. "My baby. Oh God, my baby." Watching them, Robert felt the enormity of what had happened crash over him. Emily was alive. They had their daughter back. But the girl who'd been taken 3 years ago, was she truly the same person? Could anyone survive 3 years of captivity and trafficking and come back unchanged? And the body they'd buried, whose daughter had they mourned? Whose family was still suffering, still believing their child was lost, not knowing she was actually gone? Inside the house, they sat around the kitchen table. Emily looked exhausted, traumatized, barely present. Linda held her hand and wouldn't let go. Megan kept staring, still struggling to accept that her dead sister was alive. "Emily," Robert said gently, "I know you said you didn't want to talk to police yet, but sweetheart, we have to. You're listed as deceased. There are legal issues, and the people who did this to you—" "I know, Dad." Emily's voice was weary. "I know we have to. I'm so tired. Can I sleep first? Just a few hours? Then I'll talk to whoever you need me to talk to." "Of course. Your room is exactly how you left it." Emily went upstairs, Linda following. Robert heard the door close, heard Linda's voice murmuring comfort. Megan sat across from him, her expression a mixture of joy and confusion and anger. "Dad, what the hell is happening? How is she alive? Where has she been?" "I don't know all the details yet. But Meg, she's been through something terrible. We need to be patient with her." "Someone hurt her." It wasn't a question. Yes, someone hurt her very badly. Megan's jaw set in a way that reminded Robert of Emily at that age. "We're going to find them. We're going to make sure they pay." Robert nodded. "Yes, we are. But first, they had to help Emily heal. First, they had to piece together what had happened. First, they had to understand how their daughter had returned from the dead, and at what cost." Detective Sarah Martinez from the Vermont State Police arrived at Robert's house that afternoon. Linda had called them, explained the situation, and they'd sent someone immediately. What had started as a routine traffic fatality 3 years ago had just become something much more complicated. Emily sat on the couch, wrapped in a blanket despite the warm spring afternoon. Linda sat beside her, holding her hand. Robert and Megan were nearby. Detective Martinez sat across from them, her recorder on the coffee table. "Emily, I know this is difficult," Martinez said gently, "but I need you to walk me through what happened. Start from the day you disappeared." Emily stared at the floor. When she spoke, her voice was mechanical, detached. "It was March 15th, 3 years ago. I was leaving work, the bookstore in Middlebury. It was around 9 p.m. I walked to my car in the parking lot. Someone grabbed me from behind, put something over my mouth, a cloth, something chemical on it. I tried to fight, but everything went dark." She paused, gathering herself. "I woke up in a basement, cold, dark. My hands were tied. There was a man there. I never learned his name. He said I belonged to him now, that I would do what he wanted or I'd be hurt, or killed." Linda made a sound of anguish. Robert felt rage building in his chest. "He kept me in that basement for weeks, maybe a month. Then he moved me, put me in a van, drove for hours. There were other girls there. We were all We were being sold, trafficked across state lines. Do you know where you were taken? Martinez asked. Different places. Ohio mostly, sometimes Michigan. They moved us around a lot so we wouldn't be found. Different houses, different buyers. We were never in one place long enough to... Her voice broke. I tried to escape so many times, but they always caught me, and when they caught me, they hurt me, to teach me not to try again. Robert wanted to kill whoever had done this, wanted to track them down and make them suffer the way they'd made his daughter suffer. How did you finally get away? Martinez asked. 3 days ago. I was in Columbus. The man who had me that night, he fell asleep after. He'd been drinking. I saw his phone on the table. I took it and ran. Just ran out of the house down the street. I hid in an alley for hours, terrified he'd find me. When he didn't come, when I thought it might be safe, I called the only number I remembered. My dad's. Udo, why didn't you call police? Martinez asked. Emily looked up and Robert saw something hard in her eyes. Because I did. 2 years ago, I escaped for a day, made it to a gas station, told the clerk to call police. 2 officers came. I told them everything, that I'd been kidnapped, that I was being trafficked. They said they'd help me. Then one of them made a phone call, and an hour later, the people who had me showed up. The cops handed me back to them. The room went silent. Martinez's expression showed shock. Some of the police were involved, Emily continued, getting paid to look the other way, to return girls who escaped. After that, I knew I couldn't trust anyone in uniform. So when I got away this time, I didn't go to police. I went to the only person I knew would come for me, my dad. Martinez was making rapid notes. Emily, these allegations, if police officers were involved in trafficking, we need to investigate immediately. Can you identify them? No. It was in Ohio. I don't know their names, didn't see badge numbers. I just know what they did. We'll follow up. I promise you, if officers were involved, we'll find them. Martinez paused. Emily, I need to ask about the accident. The night you disappeared, there was a fatal car crash. A young woman died, and she was identified as you. Can you explain that? Emily shook her head. I don't know. Maybe one of the other girls. Maybe she had my license, my phone. They took all our stuff when they grabbed us, distributed it among the girls to carry. Maybe whoever died that night had my things. Do you remember any of the other girls? Names, descriptions? Most just had nicknames, but there was one, Rachel. She was from Pennsylvania, about my age, long dark hair like mine, similar build. She talked about stealing a car, trying to drive home, if she got my phone, my license, if she tried to escape that night. The implication hung heavy. Another girl, desperate to escape, had died in Emily's place, and her family probably still didn't know she was gone. We'll investigate that, Martinez said. Emily, I need you to come to the station. Work with a sketch artist. Help us identify the people who did this. Every detail you can remember. Emily nodded reluctantly. Okay, but not today. I can't. Not today. Tomorrow then. Take tonight to rest. After Martinez left, the family sat in stunned silence. Finally, Megan spoke. I can't believe you've been going through this while we thought you were dead, while we were mourning you. I'm sorry, Emily whispered. Don't apologize, Linda said fiercely. None of this is your fault. You're a victim. You survived. That's all that matters. But Robert wondered if that was true. Yes, Emily had survived physically, but what had been done to her psychologically? What scars would she carry forever? Over the next days, the reality of Emily's return set in. The medical examiner who'd identified her body had to re-examine the evidence. It turned out the original identification had been rushed. The body was badly burned, dental records were inconclusive, and the presence of Emily's personal effects had led to assumptions. They'd been wrong. The real victim was identified through DNA as Rachel Winters, age 18, from Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. Her family was notified. They'd thought she'd run away. Now they learned she'd been trafficked and had died trying to escape. Robert couldn't imagine their grief, learning their daughter had been alive and suffering while they searched for her, then learning she'd died alone in a car crash. Emily worked with police, providing details about her captors, the houses where she'd been held, the other girls she'd known. But progress was slow. The trafficking ring was sophisticated, covering multiple states, involving corrupt officials. Breaking it would take time. Meanwhile, Emily struggled to readjust. She couldn't sleep in her old room. Too many triggers, too many memories of who she'd been before. She stayed in the guest room, door locked, lights on. She woke screaming from nightmares. She flinched when men got too close. She couldn't stand being touched unexpectedly. Linda moved into Robert's house temporarily so they could both care for Emily and Megan. Dr. Morrison, the grief counselor, now became Emily's trauma therapist. But progress was difficult. Emily was closed off, reluctant to discuss details, barely functional. One evening, 2 weeks after her return, Robert found Emily sitting in the backyard at twilight. He sat beside her quietly. "Do you hate me?" Emily asked. "What?" "No. Emily, why would you—" "Because I gave up so many times. When they hurt me, when things got bad, I gave up fighting. I just let it happen. I became what they wanted, so they'd stop hurting me. And I hate myself for that." Robert pulled his daughter close. "Listen to me. You survived. That's not giving up. That's adapting. You did what you had to do to stay alive, and you never stopped looking for a way out. You called me. You came home. That's not someone who gave up." "I feel like I died in that basement 3 years ago," Emily whispered. "Like the person I was is gone, and I don't know who this person is who came back. Then we'll figure it out together. You don't have to be who you were before. You just have to be someone who can move forward." 2 months after Emily's return, the FBI made major arrests in the trafficking ring. Using Emily's testimony and information from other rescued victims, they identified key players, shut down multiple locations, and rescued 17 girls. Several police officers in Ohio were arrested for corruption and complicity. Emily attended the press conference where the FBI announced the busts. She sat beside Detective Martinez, her face carefully neutral, as agents described the operation. When asked if she wanted to speak, Emily declined. But that night, at home, she seemed lighter somehow. "They got them," she said to Robert. "The man who took me, the ones who bought and sold me. They're going to prison." "Justice," Robert said. "Not justice. Justice would be them suffering the way I suffered. But it's something. It's acknowledgement that what happened to me mattered." Megan, now 17 and applying to colleges, had become fiercely protective of her sister. She researched trafficking prevention, volunteered with organizations helping survivors, channeled her rage into action. She and Emily were closer than they'd ever been, bonded by shared trauma, Emily's experience and Megan's 3 years of grief. Linda and Robert, thrown together by crisis, found their relationship healing. Not romantically, that ship had sailed, but as partners in supporting their daughters. They were better co-parents now than they'd been while married. 6 months after Emily's return, she enrolled in community college. Just one class to start, English composition. It was a small step, but it was forward movement. Dr. Morrison called it post-traumatic growth. Emily experienced horrific trauma, but she's choosing to rebuild, not to become who she was before, but to become someone new. Someone shaped by what she survived, but not defined by it. A year after returning home, Emily spoke at a trafficking awareness event. She stood at a podium before hundreds of people and told her story. Not all of it, not the details that were too painful, but enough to help others understand what trafficking looked like, how it happened, how survivors struggled. "I was a normal teenager from a good family in Vermont," she said. "I wasn't at risk by any statistical measure. But I was targeted, taken and held for 3 years. Trafficking doesn't just happen to runaways or troubled kids. It happens to anyone vulnerable for even a moment." She paused, looking out at the audience. The hardest part wasn't the captivity. It was coming home and trying to figure out how to live again, how to trust people, how to feel safe, how to be human after being treated as property. "I'm still figuring that out, but I'm here. I'm alive." And I refuse to let what was done to me be the end of my story. It's a chapter, a terrible chapter, but not the ending. The applause was deafening. Robert, sitting in the front row with Linda and Megan, cried with pride. After the event, a young woman approached Emily hesitantly. "I'm Sarah. I was trafficked for 2 years, got away 8 months ago. I just wanted to say, hearing you speak, seeing you functioning, going to school, it gives me hope that I can have a life after this." Emily hugged her. "You can. It's hard. Some days I don't want to get out of bed, but you survived the worst. You can survive the healing too." That night, Emily told Robert, "I think I want to study social work, help other survivors, be the person I needed when I first came home." "I think that's an excellent idea," Robert said. 2 years after her return, Emily was thriving, as much as someone could thrive while carrying such trauma. She was in school full-time, working part-time at a crisis hotline, dating cautiously. She still had nightmares, still struggled with triggers, still saw Dr. Morrison weekly. But she was building a life. The anniversary of her original funeral came and went without the crushing grief of previous years. Instead, the family gathered at what had been Emily's grave, now just an empty plot with Rachel Winter's name properly marked nearby, and planted flowers for Rachel, who died trying to escape, for all the girls who didn't make it home. "I used to visit this grave every week," Robert said quietly. "Talk to you, tell you about my day, apologize for our last argument." "I know," Emily said. "Mom told me. Dad, I'm sorry you went through that. Sorry you thought I was dead. I'm just glad you're not. I'm glad you called. I'm glad you trusted me to come get you. You're my dad. Of course I trusted you." They stood together in the cemetery, alive and together and damaged but healing. It wasn't the life any of them had imagined, but it was the life they had, and they were learning to live it with grace and gratitude and hope. Emily's phone rang, her crisis hotline shift calling with a question. She answered professionally, offering guidance to someone in crisis, using her trauma to help others through theirs. Watching her, Robert felt something he hadn't felt in 4 years. Hope, not for the past to be erased or the trauma to be undone, but hope that despite everything, despite the worst that humans could do to each other, his daughter had survived, had come home, and was building a future worth fighting for. 3 years after burying his daughter, 6 months after getting her back, Robert Hayes finally believed that they were going to be okay. The auditorium at Boston University was filled to capacity. Robert sat in the 3rd row beside Linda, both of them holding programs with Emily's name printed prominently. Behind them, Megan sat with her fiancé Marcus, squeezing his hand nervously. Today was Emily's master's degree graduation. 5 years after returning from 3 years of captivity, 8 years after she'd been taken, Emily Hayes was receiving her MSW, Master of Social Work, with a specialization in trauma and trafficking survivors. Robert watched as Emily walked across the stage in her cap and gown, accepting her diploma. She'd filled out since coming home, the hollowness replaced with health. Her smile, while never quite as carefree as it had been at 17, was genuine. She'd learned to live with what had happened rather than despite it. After the ceremony, they gathered for photos. Emily posed with her diploma, with her family, with Dr. Morrison, who'd made the trip from Vermont to attend. Then a young woman approached tentatively, one of Emily's classmates. "Emily, I just wanted to say congratulations, and thank you for sharing your story in our survivor advocacy class. It helped me understand my clients so much better." Emily smiled. "That's why I shared it, so people can help more effectively." The celebration continued at a restaurant Robert had reserved. As they ate and laughed and toasted Emily's achievement, Robert marveled at how far they'd all come. Megan was now 22, working as a victim advocate with the Vermont Attorney General's office. She dedicated her career to helping people like her sister, channeling her anger and pain into meaningful action. She and Marcus, an attorney she'd met through work, were planning a summer wedding. Linda had remarried, a kind man named Paul who worked as a therapist and understood the family's trauma. She and Robert maintained a friendly co-parenting relationship that had evolved into genuine friendship. And Emily had become someone none of them could have imagined 8 years ago. She worked at the New England Center for Trafficking Survivors, providing counseling and advocacy for women and girls escaping captivity. She'd testified before Congress twice about the need for better victim support services. She'd been featured in a documentary about trafficking that had won awards and raised awareness. "Speech!" Megan called out, tapping her glass. Emily stood, slightly embarrassed by the attention. "I'm not good at speeches that aren't about work, so this will be short. 5 years ago, when I came home, I didn't think I had a future. I couldn't imagine finishing high school, let alone getting a master's degree. I'm standing here today because of the people at this table." She looked at Robert. "Dad, you drove through the night to get me when I called. You never questioned whether it was really me. You just came. That taught me that I was worth saving, worth fighting for." Her voice caught slightly. "Mom, you never let me give up. Even when I wanted to disappear, you insisted I could heal. You were right." She turned to Megan. "Meg, you lost your sister for 3 years and then had to learn a different version of me when I came back. But you never made me feel like I wasn't enough. You just loved me through it." Emily wiped her eyes. "Dr. Morrison, you taught me that trauma doesn't have to define me, that I could integrate what happened into my story without letting it become the whole story." She raised her glass. "To everyone who helps survivors rebuild, to every person who believes us, supports us, fights for us, and to the 17 girls who were rescued when the FBI took down the trafficking ring. 3 of them are in college now because someone gave them a chance. That's why we do this work." "Hear, hear," Robert said, his voice thick with emotion. Later that evening, after the celebration wound down, Robert and Emily walked along the Charles River. The spring evening was warm, the water reflecting city lights. "I'm proud of you," Robert said, "not just for the degree, for everything, for surviving, for healing, for choosing to help others." "Some days are still hard," Emily admitted. "I had a panic attack last week when a client's story triggered memories. Dr. Morrison says that's normal, that PTSD doesn't just go away, but I'm learning to manage it. That's all any of us can do. Manage, cope, keep moving forward." They walked in comfortable silence for a while. Then Emily said, "Dad, do you remember our last conversation? Before I was taken, we argued about my college plans." "I remember. I've thought about it 1,000 times. I wanted to tell you, you were right. Having a plan, getting education, following through, that structure helped me when I came back, gave me something to work toward. So maybe that argument wasn't so pointless after all." Robert squeezed her hand. "I think we were both right. You needed structure, but you also needed freedom to find your own path. You've done that. Social work, helping survivors, that's your calling. I'm glad you found it. Even though it came from trauma. Especially because it came from trauma. You took the worst thing that ever happened to you and transformed it into purpose. That's not just survival, that's triumph." Emily's phone buzzed. She checked it and smiled. "It's David. He's asking how graduation went." David was Emily's boyfriend of 6 months, a fellow social worker she'd met at a conference. He was patient, understanding, respectful of her boundaries and triggers. Robert had met him twice and approved. "Tell him it went well," Robert said. "Tell him we're celebrating." As Emily texted, Robert watched the river flow past. He thought about the cemetery plot they'd visited last week, Rachel Winter's grave, where they left flowers every year on the anniversary of her death. Rachel, who died trying to escape with Emily's identification, whose family had finally gotten closure 5 years late. He thought about James Wheeler, the truck driver who'd been convicted of vehicular manslaughter in Rachel's death, serving his sentence. Wheeler had never known the real story, that the girl who died wasn't Emily Hayes, but another trafficking victim trying to get home. He thought about the 17 girls rescued when the trafficking ring was dismantled, and the countless others still trapped, still waiting for someone to find them, to save them, to believe them. And he thought about the phone call 5 years ago that had shattered his reality and rebuilt it into something he'd never imagined. The impossible call from a daughter he'd buried, saying she was alive and needed him. "Ready to head back?" Emily asked, pocketing her phone. "Yeah. Let's go celebrate some more. You earned it." As they walked back toward the restaurant where the family was still gathered, Emily said quietly, "Dad, I never thanked you properly. For coming to get me that night, for believing it was really me, for not giving up on me when I was difficult to live with those first months. Emily, you never have to thank me for that. You're my daughter. There's nowhere I wouldn't go, nothing I wouldn't do to bring you home. I know. But I want you to know that I know, that I'm grateful, that the phone call I made that night, calling you, was the best decision I ever made." Robert pulled her into a hug. "And answering it was the best decision I ever made." They stood there on the bank of the Charles River, father and daughter reunited against all odds, survivors of different traumas, but united in healing. The city moved around them, students heading to bars, couples walking hand in hand, life continuing its eternal forward motion. 5 years ago, Robert had buried his daughter and thought his life was over. Today, she'd graduated with a master's degree and a future full of purpose. The journey between those 2 points had been harder than anything he'd ever imagined, but they'd made it, together, as a family that had been broken and had rebuilt itself stronger than before. "Come on," Emily said, linking her arm through his. "Megan's probably ordered dessert for the whole table by now." "That sounds perfect," Robert said, and as they walked back to celebrate, Robert sent a silent prayer of gratitude to whatever force had made Emily remember his phone number that desperate night in Ohio, whatever had given her the courage to call, whatever had kept her alive through 3 years of hell, so she could make it home. His daughter had been dead. Then she'd called. And now she was here, alive, thriving, making a difference. Sometimes miracles happened. Sometimes the impossible became possible. Sometimes you got a second chance you never thought you'd have. Robert intended to make the most of every single day of it.